the Mary Celeste. Even if you don't know much about ships, you've heard that name whispered before. It has become more than a story, more than history. It's a curse, one passed from sailor to sailor across centuries. Everyone knows the official tale. In 1872, the Mary Celeste was found adrift, abandoned in the mid-Atlantic. The ship was seaworthy. The cargo was intact. Food was laid out, half-eaten. But the crew, every last man, woman, and child, gone. Vanished without explanation. But that's only the beginning, because the Mary Celeste did not simply become a mystery. She became something else, something that remained on the water long after her crew was gone. When the crew of the Dei Gratia first spotted her, she should have been a wreck. Ships abandoned at sea don't last long. They list, they flood, they break apart. But the Mary Celeste cut through the water as though she had a will of her own. Her sails hung loose, her movements erratic, yet she did not sink. She drifted steady, as if guided. Captain Morehouse of the Dei Gratia ordered a boarding party. At first, his men refused. They said she gave off a feeling, like walking toward a grave you knew was open and waiting. But orders were orders. The men rowed across. As their oars dipped, they noticed the sea had fallen silent. No gulls, no fish breaking the surface, no wind, just the Mary Celeste waiting. When they climbed aboard, the first thing they noticed was the smell. Not death, but damp wood, mildew, and something faintly sweet, like old fruit rotting in the heat. The galley had half-prepared food, bread laid out, meat still on the counter. A child's doll lay on a bunk, tucked neatly as if a little girl had been playing moments before. The captain's log ended mid-sentence, the ink trailing off like his hand had been pulled away. And yet, no crew. No sign of a struggle. The lifeboat was missing, but the sea was calm. No reason to abandon ship. That night, when they lashed the Mary Celeste to the Dei Gratia and left her adrift beside them, the men couldn't sleep. From across the still waters came noises, faint but clear. Boots pacing across deck planks, a woman's voice calling names, a baby crying, only to cut off suddenly. One sailor swore he saw a lantern light bobbing along the deck, though no one was there. Another claimed a figure moved past a cabin window. They tried to laugh it off, but none of them dared board her again. Yet the Mary Celeste did not vanish. She was manned again. Crew after crew tried to sail her, and time after time they returned with stories. Whispers below deck, footsteps circling the bunks at night, doors that slammed when no one was near. Some men said the ship wanted something, searching endlessly for the missing soul she lost. One log from a later captain survives in fragments. It describes waking to see a sailor at the end of his bed, a man soaked from head to toe, dripping water onto the planks, his face pale and his eyes black. The figure whispered in a foreign tongue, then vanished. Another sailor carved into the wall of his bunk, "Do not answer the voices." No one knows what he meant. As years passed, fewer and fewer men would serve on her. She gained a reputation, cursed, haunted, untouchable. But she would not rest. Even when she was finally beached and scuttled, written off as a wreck, sailors swore the sea did not claim her properly. On fog-heavy nights, ships have reported seeing her silhouette, sails tattered, her form glowing pale. Sometimes radar picks up a vessel matching her size. By the time the fog clears, nothing is there. Cruise passengers in modern times have whispered about her too. One woman said she saw a ship drifting just off the starboard side, close enough to make out its name on the bow, Mary Celeste. But when she looked again, it was gone. And then there are the voices, still carried on the waves across generations. Some sailors report hearing names called out over the water. Sometimes it's their own name. Sometimes it's the name of someone long dead. And sometimes, when the fog is thick, they swear they hear laughter, children's laughter, coming from the empty sea. The Mary Celeste is no simple mystery. It is not just the story of an abandoned ship. It is a wound in the sea itself, one that never healed. And if you ever hear your name whispered over the ocean at night, pray that it isn't her calling. Because once you hear the Mary Celeste, she never lets you go. She was called the Mercy Dawn, a name that in time would feel like a cruel joke. Built in the 1960s, she was among the largest oil tankers of her day, a steel colossus meant to carry millions of gallons of crude across oceans. Her crew called her a floating bomb. With so much fuel in her belly, one spark could end them all. They didn't realize their words would become prophecy. The night it happened was calm. The stars hung clear, the sea stretched glassy and still. Then, out of nowhere, the air crackled with a faint SOS. The voice was frantic, a man shouting above a roar of static. "Engine's gone, she's burning, God help us!" And then nothing. Hours later, a black plume rose on the horizon. Another tanker, the Vanguard Star, diverted course. What they found was something no sailor forgets. The Mercy Dawn drifted silently, her hull glowing faintly orange in the night, smoke pouring from her decks. But the flames weren't normal. They weren't orange or red. They were blue. A deep, unnatural blue that licked across the steel, clinging to surfaces water should have cooled instantly. The Vanguard Star circled her cautiously, then reluctantly, men boarded. The first thing they noticed was the silence. No alarms, no shouts, no movement. Only the crackle of those unnatural flames. They found no bodies. The crew's quarters were eerily intact, bunks neatly made, clothing folded. In the galley, plates were set, bread half cut, coffee still steaming faintly as though someone had just stepped away. But no lifeboats were gone, no signs of struggle, no footprints on the blackened decks. It was as though the crew had been plucked from existence mid-motion. And then came the sounds. From somewhere deep inside the hull, they heard it, pounding, as though fists were hammering the steel walls from within. Then came the cries, dozens of voices screaming, begging, all muffled as though trapped behind the bulkheads. One sailor swore he saw a hand slam against a porthole, charred, dripping black, before fading into smoke. They tried to fight the fire. Water hissed and steamed, but the flames only writhed, curling higher as though alive. Buckets of foam did nothing. The more they tried, the more the fire seemed to pulse, almost feeding on their panic. One man dropped his hose and refused to go further. He said he heard his own name whispered from the flames. Another claimed he saw figures moving in the smoke, silhouettes of men stumbling blindly, arms outstretched, their mouths open in screams he couldn't hear. The rescuers fled. They cut her loose and left her to drift. But the Mercy Dawn didn't sink. Days later, she was spotted again, still burning. Weeks later, again. Years passed and always the stories came. A ghostly tanker drifting through fog, blue flames licking its decks. A fire that never spread, never consumed, never died. By the 1980s, she had become legend. Sailors called her the Burning Ghost. Some said she had been cursed from her very creation, that her steel had been forged from the wreckage of warships, metal already soaked in death. Others said she had crossed into something she shouldn't have, that the ocean itself had claimed her crew, leaving only the ship as a beacon, a warning. One cargo crew swore they saw her in 1986. They described figures on deck, men wreathed in flame, their bodies black silhouettes glowing at the edges. The figures didn't run, didn't wave, didn't cry for help. They only stood perfectly still, staring out at the other ship, watching. When the fog closed, she was gone, and still she returned. Cruise liners in modern times have logged unexplained radar echoes, lights on the horizon mistaken for sunrise, only for passengers to gasp when the shape appeared. A tanker, massive, aflame, gliding silently through the night. Some claim they've even heard her radio still transmitting. A faint looping message in the static. "She's burning, engines gone, God help us." The strangest tale came from 2003, when a salvage crew dared board her again. They found her deck silent, charred black yet untouched by decay. No rust, no corrosion, no holes. In the bridge, one man found something carved deep into the console. Not written in paint, not scratched lightly, carved deep into steel by hand. 3 words. "We are here." Some believe the crew never left, that the flames claimed them body and soul, binding them to the ship forever. Others whisper the fire itself is alive, a thing that feeds not on fuel but on men. Whatever truth there is, the Mercy Dawn still drifts. A black silhouette in the fog, a tanker whose fire never dies. And if you ever see a glow on the horizon while at sea, remember, the sun rises gold, not blue. If the light is wrong, turn away, because she's still out there, and she's still burning. It always begins the same way. A crackle of static, a faint voice, and then the words that make every sailor's blood run cold. "Mayday, mayday, fire on board. Coordinates, 35 north, 12 west. Please anyone, come quickly." Then silence. The call is clear enough to be real, urgent enough to demand attention. But those who follow it, those who answer it, are never the same again. The first official record of the call came in the early 1970s. The cargo ship Everbright was making a steady crossing when the voice cut through the static. The night watch jolted awake, scribbling the coordinates onto a notepad. The location was only a few miles off their route. Captain Ellison ordered a course change. By dawn, they spotted her. A gray freighter, half hidden in fog. Her hull was weathered, her paint peeling. She drifted as though abandoned. No flames, no smoke. And yet the distress call still poured from her radio. Not just once, but looping. Over and over the same plea. "Mayday, mayday, fire on board. Coordinates 35 north, 12 west. Please anyone, come quickly." Boarding parties found nothing living. The decks were silent, slick with salt and mold. In the galley, soup sat in bowls, hardened to sludge. Plates half filled with meals still rested on tables, as if the crew had simply vanished mid-bite. Cabins were eerie in their normalcy. Journals left open mid-sentence, clothes folded, personal items scattered across bunks. And in the radio room, the set still glowed faintly. Its dials flickered, its speakers hissed. The voice came through clearly, though the radio wasn't connected to any power source. Some of the Everbright's crew refused to reboard their own ship. They swore they heard coughing in the passageways, men screaming below deck. One sailor claimed he felt a wave of heat roll past him as he opened a hatch, as though a furnace had just belched flames into his face. But there was nothing inside. Another insisted he saw a man running down the corridor, his shirt blackened, his hair aflame, only for the figure to vanish as he gave chase. When they returned to the Everbright, shaken and pale, the captain ordered the abandoned freighter left adrift. But that wasn't the end. Days later, another ship picked up the same call, then another. Always the same voice, always the same coordinates. Each time, sailors claimed to find the same freighter, weather-beaten, silent, empty. Each time, the radio still glowed, still begged for rescue. By the late 1970s, the story had spread. Sailors called it the Phantom Call. Some insisted the ship was a freighter that had truly burned decades earlier. Its crew lost in a blaze that consumed them so fast their voices were trapped in the airwaves. Others believed it was never real, just a cursed transmission, some spectral echo that bled endlessly through time. But those who claimed to have boarded her never wavered in their accounts. Food left on tables, radios glowing without power, cabins intact but abandoned, and always the sense of being watched. A Greek cargo ship logged an encounter in 1981. Their logbook described shadows that followed the crew as they explored, reflections in cabin mirrors that weren't their own. One sailor collapsed after claiming he heard his dead brother's voice calling his name through the static. The captain abandoned the inspection, fearful his men were losing their sanity. In 1987, a rescue trawler answered the call. They found the freighter again, floating in fog, her decks untouched by time. But this time, they tried something different. They smashed the radio set. The glowing tubes cracked, the voice fell silent, and the sailors breathed easier. Until hours later when their own radio burst to life. Through the crackle came the same words, now repeating through their speakers instead. "Mayday, mayday, fire on board. Coordinates 35 north, 12 west. Please, anyone, come quickly." They fled in terror, never reporting the incident officially. In the 1990s, Coast Guards logged unexplained bursts of the signal, faint and warped. And in the 2000s, amateur radio operators claimed to hear the call at night. Always weak, always distant, but always with the same coordinates, and always the same desperate voice. "Mayday, mayday, fire on board!" The strangest account came from 2011. A private yacht responded to the signal during a storm. The couple aboard swore they found the freighter, drifting just as always, but when they tried to photograph it, their cameras showed only endless fog. Yet they remember clearly seeing men on deck, blackened, burned, their mouths open in silent screams. The couple fled back into the storm, refusing to ever speak of it publicly. Only fragments of their story leaked later. To this day, the phantom call still haunts the sea. Some say the ship is a trap, that anyone who boards is marked cursed to hear the voices until their own deaths. Others believe the signal is a warning, repeating forever as a loop in time, a record of men whose final cries will never be heard by the living. But every sailor knows the coordinates, and every sailor knows this. If you hear that call on your radio late at night, don't answer, because you'll find her, and she'll find you too. The fog was so thick it felt alive. Not the kind that drifts like smoke and clears with sunlight, but a heavy, suffocating wall that swallowed sound, bent distance, and made every man on deck feel like he was being watched. The Northwind freighter pressed carefully through that fog in the 1950s when the lookout spotted her, a shape looming dead ahead. At first they thought it was a mirage, but as their ship drew closer, the silhouette sharpened. A cargo vessel, silent and steady, her hull streaked with rust. No lights, no signals, and no crew visible on deck. The captain hailed her on the radio. Silence. They tried a signal lamp, nothing. Finally, against the nervous protests of his men, the captain ordered a boarding party. They lowered a lifeboat into the glassy sea and rowed across. As the vessel loomed, the men noticed something strange. The ship's nameplate had been scraped away, jagged scars in the steel where letters should have been. It was as if someone had tried to erase her very identity. And then there was the silence. Not just the absence of voices, but a deafening silence. No gulls, no slap of waves against her hull, not even the creak of ropes in the wind. It was as if sound itself refused to touch her. They climbed aboard. At first, everything seemed intact. The decks were swept clean, equipment in place. But the galley told a different story. Plates still sat on the long table, meals half-eaten, soup bowls crusted, bread hardened to stone, coffee cups filled with mold. An ashtray held a cigarette, burned halfway and frozen in time. The men swore faint smoke still curled from it. It was as if the crew had risen mid-bite and walked out, never to return. But the lifeboats, every one of them was still there, ropes knotted tight. Cabins deepened the dread. Clothes lay folded, journals left open mid-sentence. In one room, a family photograph was pinned to the wall, a sailor with his wife and children, smiling proudly. On his desk, a diary lay open. The last entry was dated only weeks before. It ended abruptly. The fog has not lifted. The men hear voices outside the hull calling, "I fear we..." The ink trailed off, the pen snapped mid-stroke. The sailor had never finished. When the boarding party reached the bridge, the unease grew unbearable. The instruments were rusted, long dead, but the wheel moved on its own, creaking back and forth as if unseen hands still steered. One sailor muttered he felt breath against his neck, warm and foul. Another swore he saw pale faces in the fogged-over glass, watching them from outside. And then came the footsteps, slow, heavy, echoing, not from the men on deck but from the cargo hold below. They moved together, lanterns shaking in their hands. The hold was empty, yet the footsteps continued, above them, behind them, surrounding them. The men panicked. One bolted for the lifeboat, scrambling down the rope ladder so fast he tore his hands bloody. The others followed, too terrified to look back. By the time they reached the north wind, the fog had begun to clear. But when they turned around, the cargo vessel was gone. No silhouette, no rusted hull, no sound of engines. Only open water. The Northwind's crew swore never to speak of it again. But sailors talk, and the story spread. They called it the fog ship. In 1978, a British trawler claimed to have seen her too. The men described boarding her out of curiosity, finding the galley exactly as the Northwind had. Food still waiting, cups still half full. But their version had something worse. They claimed the mirrors in the crew cabins didn't reflect their own faces, but the faces of strangers. Pale, sunken-eyed men they had never seen before, staring back with expressions of despair. One man smashed a mirror in terror, and he swore he heard a scream echo from the glass. They fled, never looking back. In the 1990s, a Coast Guard cutter logged a brief sighting. They found the vessel adrift in heavy fog, sent a small team aboard, and recorded several minutes of video footage. The video was later classified, but a sailor who was there described the sound. He said when they stepped into the cargo hold, they heard dozens of voices whispering all at once. Not loud enough to understand, but insistent, like a crowd murmuring from beyond a wall. When he leaned closer, he realized the whispers were saying names of the men who had boarded, his name among them. In recent years, some claim she still appears. Cruise passengers have reported seeing a black silhouette in dense fog just off the starboard side. Some describe a figure waving from her deck. Others say they saw no one, only lights flickering in the cabins. But always when the fog clears, she is gone. No one knows what she is. Some say she was a real ship, cursed when her crew vanished into fog that was more than weather. Others claim the fog itself is alive, using her as bait, luring men aboard so it can claim them too. But everyone agrees. If you see a vessel drifting in heavy fog, nameless and silent, don't go near it, don't answer it, don't even look too long. Because some ships aren't abandoned. They're waiting. And once you step aboard, the fog will close, the footsteps will follow, and you will never leave. The first time she was seen was in the 1930s. The sea was calm, the sky moonlit, when sailors on the freighter Holland Star spotted lights on the horizon. Not just the dim glow of a working ship, but blazing, brilliant rows of windows, the kind only found on grand ocean liners. As the vessel grew clearer through binoculars, they heard something strange. Faint music carried on the wind. Strings, a waltz, and beneath it, laughter, like a party in full swing. The Holland Star's crew cheered, thinking they'd stumbled upon one of the luxury liners that carried the wealthy across the Atlantic. But there was one problem. No liner was listed in those waters that night, and none should have been. Still, the men watched as she drew closer. A majestic liner, her decks glowing with golden light, smokestacks black against the moon. The name on her hull flickered briefly in the moonlight: Aurora Belle. Her decks were crowded. Men in tuxedos and women in gowns leaned against the rails, waving merrily. Children darted among them, clutching balloons. It was a vision of glamour frozen in time. The freighter's men waved back. Some even whistled. Until the Aurora Belle passed abreast. That was when the mood changed. All at once, the passengers stopped waving, and every head turned. Hundreds of faces, all at the same moment staring directly at the men on the Holland Star. Their smiles widened, too wide, unnatural, a grotesque mimicry of joy. One sailor swore he saw blood dripping from their mouths. Another collapsed, crying that the eyes of the crowd were hollow, empty sockets staring into him. Then, without a sound, the Aurora Belle slid back into the fog and was gone. Word spread quickly. Sailors called her the Eternal Passenger Liner, a ship that should have sunk but refused to rest. And indeed, records confirmed the truth. The Aurora Belle had been real. A luxury liner in the early 1900s, praised for her speed and elegance. But she had gone down suddenly, swallowed by a fierce Atlantic storm. Hundreds had drowned that night. Passengers, crew, entire families. Survivors claim the captain ignored warnings, pushing forward for speed, gambling with lives. The ship never forgave him, and perhaps the passengers never left. In the 1950s, a British Navy destroyer logged her sighting. The captain noted in his journal that she appeared just after midnight, cutting silently across their path. The destroyer attempted to hail her. Radios cut to static, compasses spun in circles. And then the music began, not faint this time, loud, a ballroom orchestra, echoing across the water. The men swore they heard the clinking of glasses, the cheers of a crowd. One officer collapsed, clutching his throat, crying that he could feel water rushing in and hear glass breaking all around him. The destroyer's captain turned his ship away, and still, the Aurora Belle kept pace with them for nearly an hour before vanishing into fog. By the 1970s, her legend was common among sailors. Fishermen whispered of her lights flickering on the horizon, growing brighter, closer, until she loomed beside them, her passengers watching silently, unmoving. A Spanish trawler claimed they saw her during a storm. One man swore he saw his own mother standing among the passengers, waving to him, though she had drowned years earlier. When he leaned closer, the figure's face warped into a skull before fading. In 1997, a cruise couple reported her too. They described a liner gliding past in perfect silence despite rough seas. They waved to the figures on her decks. At first, the figures waved back, but then, as the ship drew nearer, the arms stretched outward, clawing at the air, fingers bending unnaturally, as though trying to snatch them from across the waves. The couple fled below deck, refusing to return topside until morning. And then came the most chilling account. In 2014, a research vessel picked her up on radar, a massive contact approaching at speed. The crew panicked, thinking they were seconds from collision. But when they looked over the bow, there was only fog. Later, they reviewed their cameras. What they saw chilled them. A liner ablaze with lights gliding directly toward them. For several frames, she filled the horizon. Passengers pressed against the rails. And in the final frame, every face had turned to stare directly into the lens. And then, nothing. The Aurora Belle has become one of the sea's most enduring legends. Some say she repeats her final night endlessly, reliving the storm that drowned her. Others believe she hunts, searching for ships to drag beneath the waves, her passengers desperate for company in their eternal ballroom. And still others whisper that if you stare too long, if you wave back, you may find yourself among them, waving forever from her decks. Every account ends with the same details. A ship of lights, a party in full swing. Passengers waving, smiling, staring. No sound of engines, no ripple in the water. Only silence, until the music starts. And by then, you're already hers. You've just crossed the boundary between reality and the unknown. If you felt the fear tonight, make sure to subscribe before you leave, because on this channel, every story is just the beginning. New nightmares arrive every few nights, each one darker than the last. Until then, keep your lights low, your doors locked, and your mind open. You are now part of the FearBound family.